Have you ever been really nervous in an interview because you just didn't know what to expect? And perhaps those nerves even kept you from performing at your peak. Well, if that's the case, then preparation is really the key. In today's video, I'm going to share how you can prepare and practice for an interview so that you're able to perform in that interview. Now, what I'm going to be sharing is really specific to behavioral-based interviewing, but these techniques really can work in a variety of interview settings as well. This is actually my second video in a series titled The Art of the Interview. The first video is all about the basics of behavioral interviewing, so be sure to check out that video if you haven't already. So now let's start talking about what you can do to prepare for an interview. The first step when preparing for an interview is to take some time to think through various examples that really highlight your strengths and show things that you've done really well on. When you're thinking of these examples, be sure to think through all the facets of your life. The first facet, of course, being probably the most obvious, which is work experience. Think through a variety of examples from your last few years of work experience. Also, you can look to school for a variety of examples, especially if you've been in school within the last few years. This can include class projects, assignments, or just managing school and personal life. Also, be sure to look for examples from the extracurricular areas of your life. This might include things like leadership roles or even other types of roles from things that you do within the community, church, etc. You can also even look to just your personal life, such as how you manage your household, etc., to provide examples. That can be especially useful if you've not been in the workforce or school recently and you're getting back in, but you might not have some of those types of examples to pull from. And when you're thinking through your examples, be sure to think through maybe the last 5 or 6 years of what you've been doing for those examples. Anything much older than that, and they may not be as applicable or seen as relevant by the interviewer. Next, after you've thought through those variety of examples, take some time to think about what types of behaviors or skills those examples really demonstrate. Those could be things like where you've shown initiative, where you've shown the ability to build strategic working relationships with others, perhaps the type of customer focus you have, or how you can build new knowledge and skills, all sorts of different things. And any given example that you come up with probably has a multitude of behaviors or skills that it might demonstrate. The next thing to do would be to build out the various pieces of the star for each of the examples. That way you have all of those different details handy and ready and already thought through. If you didn't see my last video, STAR stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. I've actually put together a document that I sometimes share with people when I'm teaching them how to prepare for an interview, and I'll go ahead and insert a screenshot of that here. But in this document, it basically gives you a structured way to think through each of these pieces and then a place that you can actually document it. Then you can print this off and take that into an interview situation so that as people are asking you questions, you have it to refer back to and you're not relying on your memory to help you remember everything that you might want for that interview. Once you've gone through all the examples that kind of come easily to you from the various facets of your life, then the next thing to do is to try to figure out what strengths and behaviors might be most important to the person going into the job role that you're interviewing for. The main way that you can try to predict what those things might be is to go back and look at the job description. Read the summary of the job and definitely pay attention to the responsibilities of the role, as those will often help you know what kinds of traits or behaviors are going to be important for the person in that role. If you happen to have access to, say, the incumbent in the role or someone else related to the role, such as the job owner or recruiter, you might have an opportunity to try to get some information from them in a more informal setting ahead of the interview on what types of things are important to that role. But if you don't, that job description really is going to be the best place to try to get a feel for that. Then, once you've determined what characteristics, skills, behaviors, etc., you think are going to be most crucial to the role, then go back to that list of examples that you came up with. Review that and see if you have examples that cover each of those things. If you don't, then now you can think through some additional examples that maybe having that list of behaviors can help tip off some examples that you didn't think of. But you'll want to come up with examples for each of those because those might be the types of questions they're going to ask you. It is important, though, to start with the process of just thinking through all the examples from your past that you can before trying to narrow in on the skills and traits that you think are most relevant to the job. Because really at this point, you're just predicting, you're guessing what you think is going to be important, but you don't really know. So you don't want to start yourself off too narrowed and focused. You want to start more broadly and then focus in just to make sure that you've been thorough. Once you've come up with examples, now it's time to practice. And I think it's very important to practice out loud. That means going through how you would tell your story using the STAR technique. Now, you can start off doing this just sitting, in a quiet room, in front of the mirror, whatever might be helpful to you. You can't really make sure you know how you're going to say something inside your head. It just doesn't translate. You really need to say it out loud. Once you get a little bit more comfortable with saying it out loud, then see if you have some opportunities to do some practice interviews or even just mock interviews. If you happen to be in school, a lot of time career service centers offer opportunities to do mock interviews where you can practice with someone who's an experienced interviewer and they can actually provide you feedback on how you did. If you're not still in school, then you might look for some kind of adult learning center or something like that where they might offer that as well. But even if you don't have access to that or you don't have the time to do that, then just find a trusted friend or family member, maybe even someone who's done some interviewing before, and just have them be that person on the other side of the table. Because just doing it in an interactive setting can also help you just be a little bit more prepared when you're now across from that interviewer in the real thing. And then the other thing to do when you're preparing for an interview is to come up with some questions that you're going to want to ask of the interviewer. Because a lot of times at the end of an interview, they will ask if you have any questions for them. So don't get caught without having something to ask and then have to flounder around or ask something that might not be a very good question. So my tips when it comes to trying to think through what to ask the interviewer is, first of all, don't ask something that's easily researchable. For instance, don't ask someone what the stock ticker of the company is or something that you can easily find on that company's website. Instead, it can be really good to ask more opinion-based questions. Something that I always like to ask if I happen to be the interviewee in a situation, which I have actually done recently, is a question like, what does success look like for the person in this role? That right there is something that's unlikely to find through other types of research, including the job description or on the website, and it allows that person, the interviewer, to tell you a little bit more about the role and how the candidate in that role can do a good job. But that's just one example of a question. You can also ask people questions like, what do they like best about working at that company? What do they like least? You can ask what the culture is like at the company. There are all sorts of different opinion-based questions, but I recommend coming up with a list of maybe 3 to 5 questions that you might want to ask at the end of that interview. But just remember, by the time you get to the end of the interview, which is typically when they ask you what questions you have, you may or may not have much time. So if you've thought through these questions and prioritized them, then you'll be good to go once you're in the interview. So once you've gone through the preparation of examples, the practicing of examples, and coming up with your own questions, then you should be much more prepared for when you actually go into the interview. And I always find that the more prepared I am, and the more I've predicted the types of things that could happen in a situation, the less nervous I am, and the better I'm able to perform. So I hope you found this video helpful. Be sure to stay tuned for my next video in the series, which is going to be on top tips to keep in mind when you're actually in the interview setting. So you understand how the interview process is going to work, you've prepared for it, but now what are the things to keep in mind when you're in the interview? If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you can be notified when my future videos post. You can subscribe either through clicking the link down below, or I'll also include a link on the video screen. Also, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up to let me know that you found this video useful or enjoyed it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.